Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Bunker Show, coming to you live and direct from our secret bunker hidden deep, deep, deep beneath the sewers of Westminster. And we apologise coming to you a little bit late today, but we will be going on just a little bit longer so that you get your full Bunker Show this evening. And if you've got any questions, as always, we've got the chat room that you can just a click away from the Dark City main page. And joining me this evening, as always, in the bunker, here's Jimmy.
Yeah, and as always, brilliant to be here. And just a big shout out to Bob and the guys for at Dark City Radio for pulling off the show, and keeping the gremlins at bay. And I have to say, Fabrice, I'm really looking forward to tonight's show because our guest is from my neck of the woods, kind of. So we're practically neighbours. I'm looking forward to talking to him.
Yeah, me too, and definitely a big up to the superstars at Dark City for helping us through all the gremlins and making sure that they keep the show on the road or the show on the airwaves. And tonight we've got a guest who's all the way from New Zealand, which is just a little bit away from Australia, and over there, it's just gone 7 o'clock in the morning, and Cliff, thanks for joining us. And how's tomorrow looking?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's an honour. I've listened to your show, quite a few times. I've met Fabrice. I've met you before, of course, through the No State project.
Yeah, and
yeah.
doing legal work. So it's a real pleasure to have you on here, especially bright and early in the morning. And one thing we do have in common is holding authority to account with logical and reasoned questions. And as I've noticed with that even if you do it in New Zealand on the other side of the world, it works pretty much the same as it does here, being another sort of country with the Queen as head of state. So, Cliff, how long have you been, I guess, inquiring into how things work and how we can play an active part in making them better, and being aware of exactly what's going on beneath the headlines and the spin?
Sure. Yeah, good question. Yeah, well, I've been on this, I like to call it a walk, because it's usually a lone pathway. It's the road less travelled, as has been said before. It's also like this type of thing that a lot more people are getting interested in. I call it the occult world, because occult, of course, means hidden. It's not evil. And it's sort of hidden. A lot of it's sort of hidden in old books, of course. You need to do research. But a lot of it, if you get a foundation in the occult world of the whole world, you'll find that it's hidden in plain sight. A lot of stuff ends up being in plain sight.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started very early in life. I was always quite a rebel. I went to a couple of high schools. One of them was a bit violent, believe it or not.
And that can get you a bit of a fast upbringing.
Yeah. So I ended up going to a Catholic school for a while, and I wasn't Catholic. You could say I was brought up Christian, like I had the Christian values and stuff, good old-fashioned New Zealand type values.
Yeah.
And so I get the second school I went to gave me a lot of freedom because they were very religious. So they had a lot of good intention. They had to have that good intention there, being a religious school, along with all the rules, of course. You had to be a bit more tidy, and you had to be a bit more based on the rules of the Christian philosophy. So that was pretty cool. So I was a musician for a while. I still am a musician. I don't work professionally anymore as a musician, but I was quite young, so I grew up quite quickly. I got into astrology at about 12, 13. I just gravitated towards it. So I was into, that's really part of the occult, because that can go into some deep stuff in itself, just astrology.
Yeah, well, astrology is linked in, I suppose, with things such as the nature of the tarot and symbology, which is, of course, something which pervades quite a lot of modern life.
Just out of curiosity, just to divert very quickly, how do you feel about NASA messing around with the astrological signs?
Good question. I don't trust much that comes out of their mouths, to be honest. The amount of information out there, and NASA is occult, of course. A lot of us sort of looked into that. They have a definite occult side. It's very like most stuff put out in the media. I shouldn't really say this. If you were to click on Google News, I mean, I check in every now and again just to see what they're putting out there, but I don't believe any of it, because all of the mainstream news, if you were to click on Google News, you'd see the same old bias. We start to see their very bias. They're pro-Israel and they're anti-Islam and they're anti-Russia at the moment, things like that. So the whole thing is controlled by in New Zealand, we have the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Australia, Canada, Britain, etc., even India, Pakistan. In America, it's called the Council on Foreign Relations. They couldn't put royal in it because it's anti-American. So the whole thing is controlled by this, you could call it a think tank, but it's a military think tank. Anyone can look it up. It's not hidden, but it is the machinery that runs so many things militarily, because it's actually a military think tank. So all of it's lies, all of it. It'll never, ever tell you any truth. The only truth you can get from the media in the mainstream is what I like to call the shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. You'll get a bit of truth, but it's nowhere near the real truth. So I don't believe that the astrology thing's been right from the start, really. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned media there. I mean, what's the media made up of in New Zealand in terms of television broadcasting and newspapers of the mainstream, and who are they owned by? And sort of, do you have like a national broadcaster? Over here we have the British Broadcasting Corporation, which is supposedly a public service broadcaster and funded by a license fee.
Sure, ours would be very similar. Be the New Zealand Broadcasting Authority, they call it. And they have the 3 channels and all that. I don't actually have a TV. I haven't watched TV in probably over 10 years, to be honest. Even over 10 years, probably nearly 15 years. I've never really even had a TV. That was part of what, like, waking up to this TV and media thing. It was quite interesting because I'd already found out that the world was run solely really on banking, the monetary system. I learnt that it was global. I learnt that there was these occult Freemasonry affairs connected to it, which goes into another area higher than banking. So I started to get a hold of all this stuff, which led into, of course, money in courts, and the black robe judge and stuff. I found Jordan Maxwell quite early on, back in early 2000s, and he really accelerated my knowledge, got me onto the path of commercial law. Then I learned commercial law was global. Of course, again, money. It doesn't matter which country you're in. You're still going to have the law of money. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a few interesting things happen recently in this part of the world in terms of how offshore interests, which I guess is the
Private.
The assault vehicles of that sort of Panzer banks, that. They use to destabilize and take control of countries such as Greece. In recent times, I mean, when you're talking about that sort of higher than government destabilization of countries, I mean, is New Zealand currently engaged in austerity politics?
Yes. You'll find in the news, again, this is interesting, like we can get a lot of truth out of the news. It's like, even though it's lies, that's so contradictory, but you find that, like you guys must have come across, even in psychology or communication and things like that, you look at if you're with someone in person, you look at the body language, you can get more truth sometimes than what they say. So in the media, you can't look at a body to see the body language. So, but it's the unsaid that I look for, or it's the why did they put that media article out? Because none of it's done by mistake. None of it.
Yeah.
So and a lot of it's to do with timing too. When you attribute the timing of certain articles or certain news stories, you can kind of go, "Whoa, that's no coincidence."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, timing. So. So what they do in New Zealand and other countries, of course, like the big organisation I said, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the CFR in America. So it's the same thing, but they word it differently. Like they don't call it austerity here, really. They probably did once or twice, but they don't push it. They just do it. Over here is very devious. They push it, but they don't even tell people anything. So generally New Zealanders are completely in the dark. They give us absolute rubbish in New Zealand media. Absolute rubbish. It's totally Marxist. It's totally degraded. But it's got that nice little fluffy bounce to it for the farming types.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in a couple of weeks, we've got Neil Sanders coming on the Bunker Show, who's written a couple of books on mind control, media mind control, and so it's one thing that's been very active in that realm over here is racism and the stoking up of sectarian or even sort of postcode. Sort of divisions between people.
Sure.
I mean, I know that there's been many issues over the years with the indigenous population in New Zealand, and how the government has treated them as there has been in Australia, but. Is that something that the media is pushing in terms of divisiveness? Because quite a number of people who live in New Zealand are also of Asiatic origin.
Yeah, Asiatic. Yeah, we've like all Western cultures around the world, we're getting the same treatment as everywhere else. We're probably not getting the flood of immigration from Syria as much as Europe. But we are getting Syrian refugees. We are getting Afghanistani refugees, and all the people being bombed. We are getting them here too. Australia's getting them. We're getting them. It's like really. When you go over the internet, my forte is the international scene. New Zealand is just a corporation to me. It's one of their corporations. The big boys corporations. Mm-hmm. So. It's almost like every country, especially in the West, has its own little slightly differing culture. It's got its own foundational history that has to be manipulated long term into a standard system. This global New World Order thing they're trying to put in. It isn't there yet. It's close. We have the New World Order is already here, really at least back in the early 1930s when they changed the money and the law, which you guys probably come across. Yeah. So that was a big change that you could say was global.
You mentioned previously, Marxism. How do you see a Marxist agenda being sort of how's it expressing itself in New Zealand culture?
Yeah. Okay. The full the word or the buzzword you could say going around in the underworld scene is cultural Marxism. That's what they call it. You've probably heard of it. It really it came out of Britain, out of the main think tanks of Britain, Club of Rome, all the usual culprits, we'll call them, United Nations, believe it or not. So it came out of Britain, and really when you talk about the cultural Marxism, of course, most people think, well, that sounds communistic. That's got something to do with Russia. Well, yeah, it does, but, if anyone can go online and check out, and I've done a lot of posts on it, I'll just have a look. Because there's so many researchers I've looked at.
I mean, how do you think it kind of expresses itself in the 21st century in terms of through that corporate mechanism?
Well, obviously the media, which means magazines, TV, movies, it manifests itself basically as a pattern of pro-secular and very scientific, which of course is you guys would have come across, especially say David Icke could be a classic one to point out. He mentions that a lot, saying that basically the science has become a religion, whereas religion should be a science. So a lot of the science we have is fake. So couple that with magazines, propaganda, movies, buzzwords, slogans. Lenin said, "We will rule by slogans."
Yeah.
Lenin and all these people in history, of course, are not just peasants. They're trained by bankers. See, banking isn't just to do with money. Banking is to do with manipulation. Banking is really to do with manipulation on all levels, manipulating minds, manipulating trade, of course, manipulating buzzwords, because they own think tanks, they run think tanks. At higher levels, money is not even important. It's not important at all. People say,
So, in terms of some of the things you're talking about would be some of the foundations that we often hear about, like the Roundtree Foundation or the Carnegie Foundation.
Yep.
Or is it the Carnegie Foundation for...
Yep. And they're private international foundations. They're private international. Again, the international scene is my forte, and I got into that when I got into commercial law. I found some people that are absolutely incredible with their knowledge. Usually I found them in the US, and which is good because the hegemony came out of Britain, of course, and was handed hegemony is the capstone of the leading currency of the world. And so the capstone was sent to America. All this is planned. They plan it. It's no mistakes. America got the torch. Now they had the US dollar as the hegemony currency of the world. That's why it's an international currency. And so the cultural Marxism is now coming out of the US. Russia was taken over by the, you could say, British Empire a long time ago. They've taken them over. And they tested the techniques, we'll call them the internationals. In fact, there's the common term. Common term is Communist International. Mm-hmm. So communism and banking is absolutely intimate. very intimate. It's a global movement. So they took over Russia. They tried their techniques on them, through these revolutions, because they're revolutionaries. They cause chaos. It's order out of chaos, right? You must have heard that, order ab chaos. So order ab chaos, now you're getting into the occult Freemasonry again. And people forget this. People forget that the whole thing is based on chaos theory, chaos game theory.
As you're describing, like the makeup of the banking, the banking system and who's involved, just as you're describing it, it can sound very ritualistic, right then and there, as like Freemasonry and the connection to business is, quite interlinked.
Yes. And Freemasonry in this country is huge. There's no doubt about it. My grandfather was a Freemason. And he didn't go that high, but I picked his brain, especially before he passed away. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me the truth. I think he did, because he didn't have long to live. And I said to him straight, "Hey, Grandpa, you must have heard of Albert Pike, right? You guys must have heard of him, Albert Pike, the Pope of Freemasonry." Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, and Giuseppe Mazzini. So, so he didn't know him. My grandpa didn't even know Albert Pike. So I thought, oh my God. And he was telling the truth. So they, and there's a whole lot of stories I can tell you about Freemasons and ones I've met. It's truthful. You can say, well, there you go, there's the evidence. But they are filtered. It's another filtering system. We know that, anyone can study it for a week, and you'll find that it's a filtration system where they go up the certain amount of degrees. They're graded. So there's another.
Are they sort of locally ingrained in things like property development and such like, and public-private enterprises? Yes. Is that how they're manifesting there as well?
Absolutely. Well, really, look at the symbols of the Pope and the Vatican and the cardinals and all the rest of it. All of this stuff fits together. It's so interesting because to the average person that doesn't look into it, you could say, and I do say to them, I say, look, the bottom line is this. If you don't know that there's a small elite running the world, then you haven't done your homework. But when you actually do the homework and study it, and I can give you a whole lot of areas to look at that can link up so people get it, it's absolutely amazing how they put it together and run the world. And a lot of it is mind control. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And mind control is obviously training, Pavlovian training, repetition, behaviorism. Psychic drone, behaviorism. Behaviorism goes into using the environment, which is they'll put in the computer, they'll put in the they'll give you windows, all of these things are Freemasonic words. And too, by the way, look at the symbols all around us. We have windows with the colors, they're Freemasonic colors. Look up just a Freemasonic temple, you'll see some of them have a big 5-pointed star, a pentagon, a pentagram, and they got the red, blue, green, yellow, and white, Then you've got the Pentagon in the US, You've got all over the world, including the communist countries, you've got pentagons and pentagrams as their symbols. You've got the hammer and sickle. The hammer and sickle is Saturnalian stuff. It's not even to do with farming and all that. It's to do with Druidic symbolism, really. And there we get Druidic. There's more Freemasonry-based stuff again.
in terms of being able to we mentioned earlier when we were talking about astrology, the use of those symbols, and how that language sort of works in plain sight, as you're talking about when those I guess embedded pieces of symbolism and how they thread together, in terms of some of the I guess the practical uses in the way that they signal each other, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'd say that would lead into archetypes, and archetypes are almost, you could say, timeless. We have the memory imprint in our DNA of certain symbols and archetypes, characters, heroes, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we have different generations come up, we have children and they have children, etc. The children, of course, keep the memory of the parents. We can see that they look like their parents. So that is memory, that's proof of memory, in itself. It's manifesting a body. So the memory must hold these symbolic memories of the past. There's been tests with regression on people and children, that you'd think there's no way they're going to pull such an intricate lie, where a child knows that in their past life they were at this place that they've never been to in this life, and they take them there, and the child takes them up to a certain thing and says, here it is, it was buried here, and they dig it up and it was there, So there's a lot of evidence.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I mean, we've spoken with a few people about the subject of non-local information transference, or knowing something that there's actually no physical way that information could have been given to you.
Sure.
And in terms of things like that, with the use of hypnosis and use of regression, there has been quite a lot of very positive results in terms of utilizing that, like I said, non-local memory or genetic memory. Now,
That's my latest thing too, by the way. My latest study I'm getting into is hypnosis, and I'm actually doing a diploma in it. So it leads into all that stuff we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, because there's quite a lot of ways in which the media can utilize that, and some of the governmental organizations, in terms of the way in which a human being will react to an orange light, a red light, or a blue light, and in terms of how that light's presented. And so it's no chance that the emergency services utilize a blue light with the psychological effects that it has. And I think that in some ways that's probably part of that sort of genetic memory or genetic coding, or that and
totally.
How the people who have hold of that information are in a position to take advantage of it. Rather like the trained police officer who's stopping at the side of the road, who will stand above you when he's in a car to have that greater height advantage.
Sure. A classic one of colours in the Western world, probably globally, but definitely the Western world, is the red and the blue. The red and the blue. In biology, most of us have seen the human body has the red and the blue. The veins or the nerves, they demonstrate to be red and blue in the symbol diagrams of biology. So that's representing, this duality of humans. You've got two eyes, two arms, everything's divided. You've got the inner world, the outer world. You've got the happy, sad, whatever, you've got the duality. And so when you get duality, there's sometimes controversy. Like if we've got differing opinions between people, there may not be an argument, but you'll have friction that will create, hopefully, if the people are intelligent, they'll do Socratics like we do, and you'll come up with a really good answer. And that answer's the synthesis of the two opposing forces, the red and the blue again. And then you go into all of the public system, the machine, I just call it the machine, or the matrix, You get the police; they have red and blue lights. You get the Labour Party and the National Party, red and blue. You get this all around the Western world. You get the flags are red and blue and white. They have the white in there. The white is the sun. The white is the synthesis. So if you look at a lot of people into this, they study the Illuminati. You'll find that that's the code. This is this Illuminati code of red and blue. It's a dialectic, a Hegelian dialectic, you could say. It's not good or bad, but it seems to be made up into our consciousness.
You mentioned friction before, and I thought that was a really good description for like the friction between ideas. And do you see that the friction between ideas is really intrinsic to the evolution of thought and such, and that it's kind of like an intrinsic part of cultural Marxism to kind of avoid the friction, to totally smooth it over?
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah. Anyone can think deeply on it. Yeah. The cultural Marxism has definitely got a component of sedation, you could say. And that sedation is definitely got to be careful here, because reading a book, you're being downloaded too. So that's a deep question, because let's do books and TV as an example. So TV, you sit down, or I don't, but some of us do. We sit down and we relax, So when you relax, you're in a light trance. And to be programmable with hypnosis, you don't need to be in a deep, drooling trance. You just need to be relaxed and have your critical mind go to the background, and you can pretty much, you're open to be programmed. So people sit in front of the TV and they're downloaded, they're entertained. So the entertainment means they relax, and then they get downloaded with the information. And there's subliminals, there's the cultural programming obviously in there, including the words. A classic example is especially cultural Marxism. Look at and definitely New Zealand news anyway, and I'd be pretty much bet that it's going to be in everyone's news because it's all run by the same people. So over the years, say the last 30 years, and I'm in my 40s now, so I've seen a bit, and they have degraded the speech for a start. Like those of you who've looked at George Orwell's 1984, he talks about linguistic minimalism, where every year the dictionary got smaller. So they're doing that. That's part of cultural Marxism on a deep level that people need to claw up on.
But what they're doing today with the dictionary is they're actually expanding it to the same effect with nonsense words. And
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, look how detailed that is. I mean, that in itself, is incredible to wrap our heads around, because it's like on one front we've got overloading of information, hence the information age we're in. So we're overloaded with information. Most of it's rubbish or repetition or just shallow. It's sugarcoating. And then we have the real. It's good of you pointing that out, because the important words that we need to express ourselves to be free is taken away. So, and that's what I'd sum up to be called degradation. So cultural Marxism's purpose is to degrade people. It's to degrade their spirituality, which is individuality. Individuality means the ability to think for yourself, and thinking for yourself empowers yourself to be truly confident in yourself. If you have to go to someone else all the time, some expert, for information, that can be kind of degrading in itself, because you're not thinking. And I'd be the first, like, teaching law and propaganda and self-empowerment is what I'm into. I would definitely point these things out to people. So back to the TV. So they're cutting the words, but also in the news they're now putting swear words in there. They're putting, F-U-C-K. They're putting in a lot of degrading words. I don't know. You must see it in your news. They'll say bitch instead of something else, or they'll say F-U-C-K, and all of this stuff. People will go, yeah, but so what? We're living in a freer world. Well, this is how they're doing it. See, they use. Some of you guys have probably heard that the new communist movement's called liberal. And most of us have heard that. Even years ago, they said it's the mask of this communist globalist movement is liberalism, right? And liberalism, liberty, right? So we want our rights. We want our rights, and you can see that happening.
It's a really insidious form of liberalism, because it seems to be kind of permeating from American universities and spreading outwards into the greater world.
Yes, and again, back to that hegemony thing, the torch being given to America. So, and the Americanization coming into the world, and they're spreading it. They're calling it democracy, and then for those of us that have looked, democracy in this age goes back to Adam Weishaupt, the Bavarian Illuminati. He came up with this plan of the democracy, so it all ties together.
Well, they're all just, these guys, these alleged liberals, are just, basically, tearing apart the American Constitution.
Yeah. Well, again, though, that's through the media, isn't it? They're never going to tell you that in their law books, but they'll tell you it on the media, and so it's been said by high court judges. The media has no obligation to tell you the truth. That's very important. So what's going on? This is just my opinion, but what's going on is this. Like the maxim of law says, let he who wishes to be deceived be deceived. That's a maxim. So when the judge is sitting on the bench, he's thinking, what did you volunteer into? What did you buy? Did you buy a lie? And do you believe the lie? Did you buy it? See, so the whole thing's run on commerce, and commerce has to be voluntary. I can't force a sale on you. So the media comes out, which is a corporation, and it sells its bullshit to people, and they buy it. They buy it. It could be a thing or it could be an idea. And then the person follows through what they think to be true. They get into trouble through the law, which is to do with the true law. Natural law is to do with ethics, morality, and the foundation of how people need to survive. It's the true foundation of law is a good thing. It's not a bad thing at all, but it's been sugar-coated with corporate law, which is private, which makes sense. It comes from a private source. Therefore, it's voluntary. And we've heard that, taxes are voluntary. Why do we go to jail? Or this and that's voluntary. I mean, hell, I've even heard in the US that going to jail is voluntary from people that know. So the whole thing is consent. I've come quite convinced that it's all consent. But people need to learn what consent is.
It's very difficult to, as you well know, over in New Zealand, as well as over here, as well as in America, Canada, Israel, and a number of places. It's very difficult to find, any evidence that you have any obligation towards the state in terms of a lot of their administrative law. When. Yes. We've had people who've been on the show who've been litigants in person, who've asked for evidence of the application of the law, have asked for evidence of a complaining party, have asked for evidence of how any obligation, any evidence of jurisdiction that the court claims to have over them. And in terms of that kind of understanding, and you mentioned ethics earlier, and obviously when you're aware of that has a big ethical question when it comes to consent and manufactured consent, and how's that kind of understanding impacted you?
Incredible. I've been through many heavily emotional high and lows through this journey, and I'd warn people that want to learn and want to know. There's a few things you need to know. That is, when you find some beautiful pieces to this puzzle, you get hooked. It's like being bitten by a vampire. You become a night dweller. You sleep in the day and you get up at night and you study, and it's addictive. The more you find out, the more you want to know, and then eventually you come into some pieces that are so crushing to your soul that you seriously go through some hell depressions. You definitely do. Anyone I know that's been through that, they pretty much have that experience. Then the natural inclination is to run out and tell everyone, and then you realize that people don't want to know. They actually just don't want to know. So you're stuck by yourself. And I was like this for years. And when I first ventured out into the social media, I joined Dean Clifford's site. You know Dean Clifford?
I've heard of Dean Clifford and his work. I've never spoken to him, but he's definitely pioneered a few elements of the legal work that people wish to do to empower themselves.
Yep. So I did a couple of shows with him because I was into the law thing when I joined. And here I was with all this information. This is years ago. This is 2010. And I thought, I could see Dean was onto some cool stuff. And I had the administrative money side of it down, the banking side. And he was right into the trust law thing. That was his forte when he came out. And so I worked my way through the group and got, because I knew a lot about jurisdiction back then, which is an awesome topic. Jurisdiction's awesome. I mean, it gets into the Marcratic method that we look at.
Yeah, indeed, and it's also a very fundamental for the things that we've spoken about earlier today in terms of liberty and freedom, and I guess being a sovereign individual who takes responsibility for themselves and their actions.
Yeah, that's it. And then again, jurisdiction goes into consent again. And consent really is expressed or implied. And the reason why we get caught up in the crap is because we fall for implied contracts. And there's wolves out there that know the commercial law quite well, and they want to get you into an implied contract. So when you consent through implication, they can keep going with the process of commercial law, which is due process, of course. So they give you the due process, and then people don't know this. We never get taught it. So they argue, they fight, or they throw it away, and then they end up in court, and the judge says, well, you've defaulted. You're out of here. You're history, buddy. So it's the implied contracts. There's a book called Invisible Contracts by George Mercier. Funny, his name's Mercier. Mercury, commerce, mermaid. It's all water. It's all the law of the sea. So we can get into that too if you want. I got right into the occult side of banking law. The straw man and all that, and I used it and it works. But for people that like some people come out and say the straw man argument. They say, oh, the straw man argument doesn't work. Well, one, that's so stupid to say that because it's so shallow. And two, there's no argument. Arguing is going to get you into the shit.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, in terms of some of the practical experiences for people who, have defended themselves in court. I know that you and I have done a certain amount of role playing in the past. I know I've seen and heard some of your work with that in terms of being able to help people when they do have to go to court with a particular issue. And
sure, I mean, ideally, the best thing ultimately is to not go to court. Even when I found this stuff back in 2003, and I've done talks, and I will be doing talks on the YouTube channel with Lucy, our co-host, and other people, but I'm going to go into a lot of this stuff in detail, hopefully. And my idea is to show that you don't really want to go to court. But to not go to court means you... Yeah, and to not go to court means you have to be knowledgeable. If you're not knowledgeable, then you'll end up in court, and then you're going to start having to do damage control like Mark talks about.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
you already
take
have the invitation to court, and again is, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, arguing doesn't actually get you anywhere, but having the ability to ask appropriate questions so that you can narrow down exactly what is going on in terms of what you're entitled to be informed of, whether you have that entitlement, why you don't, if you're presumed innocent, or some of those things that that kind of unmasks an element of that coercive consent.
Yep. There's another thing I've seemed to crystallize over the years, and that is, and this goes into hypnosis too, because it really came home for me when I was looking at, I think it might have been NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. Mm-hmm. And neuro-linguistic programming is really awesome. I'd recommend it to everybody, just to even delve into it, because it can help you solve problems.
Yeah. And in what way does it help you solve problems? I mean, NLP is something that I've used simply by being aware of the words that I call myself, and I found that that's had a positive experience. I mean, what other ways can NLP be useful in terms of being able to lead a more productive and happier life?
Okay, well, it's neuro-linguistic programming, linguistic language. So we're using a language, and that language can be an inner talk to yourself, like you're saying, because that is a language. You're talking to yourself. And doesn't mean you're mad, it doesn't, some people talk to themselves openly, it doesn't mean you're mad. It's actually quite healthy to do it.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you'll be assured of quality of company.
yeah.
Well, surely, like the internal dialogue's the way you work stuff out.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing wrong with it. So NLP...
It can also be used, I guess, in commercial ways, because if I, slip in the words, you're going to like this, and then I go into what this is, and, if you don't fully register the prefix to the actual example, then you never actually catch the neuro-linguistic programming going in, giving you that suggestion that you're going to like it.
Yep, that could be right. Yeah, reframing. They're reframing words to make them, and this again, all of these tools, they're powerful tools. They're double-edged swords. They're good and bad. It's like anything, any powerful tool can be used for bad. And so the media is using it in a devious way. They're using NLP, of course. They're reframing things to make them seem comfortable, and then using all these other techniques to confuse you, so you give up. You don't even want to study it. But the positive side of NLP, being a language, and this is just to sum it up real easy for people, the whole thing with controversy has the red and the blue, the arguments to get you into trouble, which is the synthesis to get you into court to pay money. So, being a language, NLP, the use of language needs to be flexible. And the big thing that came home for me with NLP and all this other stuff I've learned is that one of the ideas or statements that we learnt was, in a system, and this is any system, in a system, he who is most flexible has the most control. So NLP to use it to solve problems, you become flexible. You become like water, like Bruce Lee would say. And now we're getting into the Marcratics again. This is why I come full circle back to Mark's work, because it is very good to practice. It's not the only way, but it's a beautiful way to solve problems. So it goes back to that again. And then when you learn commercial law, you're looking at the monetary system. The whole point is to get harmony. And proof of this is all banks have to zero the accounts at the end of the day. They have to do their debt and credit in their double entry bookkeeping, and they have to bring the account to zero. So,
yeah. In terms of when you work with that kind of flexibility and that understanding of I guess how language can be used. What are the sort of ethical repercussions that you found from that?
Yeah, good. Well, you see, if we go back in history and we look at all of the people that have, some of them have been imprisoned just for being a free thinker, so in the old days, it was worse in some ways because they just throw yourself. Yeah, they'll burn you at the stake. So a lot of free thinkers, because nothing's changed. There's always been a debtor-creditor system on the earth, as long as there's been a money system, which has always been here in civilization. As part of civilization is money. So if we go and look at the people, what's it, Buchanan, I think, comes to mind. Anyway, just look up all the free thinkers of the world. They all talk about ethics and morality. That to be free, to be truly free, is to be of a higher ethical and moral persuasion and thinking and being. So this fits together, proving cultural Marxism and its goal. Cultural Marxism is to degrade the mind, degrade the person's language, to make him feel like an animal. So he doesn't think. So he goes to the priest, the all-knowing priest who's meant to be in touch with God, the expert, to rule him, to tell him what to do. See, so this is exactly the plot. So then they teach you with controversy. They teach the controversy. So people are confused and running around and they don't know what the hell's going on. Yet if they just pulled back and just learnt some of these basics, these foundational things of humanity, then we can make some huge progress because we won't fall for their cons anymore.
Well, I was going to ask you earlier, when you were talking about commercial law being really transferable around the world, would you kind of agree that, one of the driving forces behind commercial law is just pure logic, and, logic is, in essence, a universal language. Now, take that a step further and apply, the basics of commerce law to, the fact that the world economy, capitalism, is run, by commerce. So, considering that, logic should be dictating, the way capitalism develops and, the way it develops in everybody's interests. What would you say is the failure of capitalism? Do you think it's a failure of adhering to commercial law?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of that. There's a lot of evidence that there's been a failure on purpose. That kind of brings to mind the 1933 changeover, the what will we call it, the New Deal. I think in the public they called it the New Deal.
Yeah.
What happened was the whole world pretty much went into a bankruptcy, and they all called the Golden. The 1933. It's so long ago when I looked at this stuff, but. They changed the money, they changed the law. It went from
being based on gold into effectively what's now become the petrodollar. Which is
it went into the fiat currency.
The
fiat currency. They can loan out 10 times what they have on the books. Fractional reserve banking, that's the word. Yeah. So now when that came in, they had the system set up so the public entities were prepaid. That's the bottom line. That's why they had the birth certificate. And the birth certificate, I went into a little bit of it in one of my first talks with the group. And I said that this is a deep subject, just the birth certificate alone is a very deep thing, because it's a nexus. It's the thing that goes into commerce when you're born. And you being a human resource, according to them, the big boys, being a human resource, that bond, that birth certificate bond, is very important.
It definitely is to them. I mean, it's quite interesting when, it can again be undone with, one question, I suppose, which is, are you responsible for your parents' actions when you're of age? Because if one of my parents went out and chopped somebody's head off, unless I lived in North Korea, I wouldn't be punished for their crimes.
Sure.
And so if they want to sign any certificate under duress or not, it's definitely something that the bureaucrats take very, very seriously. But yeah, it's something that they can't evidence to a grown-up person when they try and utilize it for leverage.
Mm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, ignorance is just everywhere, even throughout the system of quote-unquote professionals, because the professionals, this goes back into what we just started talking about, the cultural Marxism, etc., we'll just call it propaganda, has it influenced commerce? Well, of course, yeah, it has, because it's distorted the view of what we're looking at in the world. That's obviously, what mind control and...
the interesting thing is you mentioned the changeover of the currency system when it dropped the gold standard, and before that, as Jimmy was talking about the failure of capitalism, when effectively from that moment onwards, and probably before then as well, the system didn't become a free market, but it actually became cartelized. It became a series of cartels in terms of the number of independent business owners. I think over 90% of businesses were independently owned 100 years ago. Today, I believe it's less than a few percent. Yep. So, and when you have that sort of capitalism or free market capitalism is what it's commonly termed, when it's actually rigged, corrupt cartelism. As how that fits into I guess the cultural Marxism, and how that has sort of associations with Reds under the bed and communism. In terms of how the media, like to spin it, when actually it's another use of that Orwellian inverse of language.
Yeah, it's the reality we have set up through the 1933 Bretton Woods system was set up to be a more perfect government. They called it a more perfect government, and they're not lying. It was actually set up to give us more options, and it shows. We got the ability to go bankrupt, which, if you're smart, you can get away with a lot of stuff using that. Winston Schrapp goes into a lot of that stuff. I've got a lot of his work. You probably heard of Winston Schrapp. He goes into the global bankruptcy. We're already in bankruptcy. There's different levels of bankruptcy. But anyway... So in 1933, when they really capitalized on the straw man, when they brought out the birth certificate thing in the version that we have today, they've had birth certificates for thousands of years in different ways. But this particular one is the Sesta KV, which we've heard about on the public side. And then we have the Foreign Situs Trust, which is on the private international side back in New York. And so they didn't tell us the inherent remedies that were built into this new Bretton Woods system. It goes into double entry bookkeeping. They didn't have that before 1933. So the banking system changed. So on one hand, it gave everyone more control. Whoever has the knowledge has more control. So the big boys that planned and created this new system, they obviously control it better now. But if you figure out how they've done it, then you'll get more control. That's how it works. So the government, and even my dad said this, he said the government's job is to govern the corporations. The government is there to protect the people from the corporations, right? We've heard that before. So, because they gave you the strawman Caps Corporation at Bethesda KV, they govern the corporations. See? So that's how they govern us. They drag the strawman into court. You're the representative for the strawman and all this. So
it's also, as you know, going back to the very basics, when you ask the questions, whose court is it? Who owns it? In your jurisdiction, allegedly. In my jurisdiction, allegedly.
Yes.
It's the same gangster. It's the same, figurehead. It's the
same technique. Yeah, they've just added in the before 1933, when they had the gold, it was common law, and it was also execution of law, and then after 33, it was called maritime equity law, and operation of law, not execution of law. So being in an operation of law gave more due process, hence more perfect government, where common law was execution of the contract. So you had less remedy. Mm-hmm. You actually had less remedy before. So for people that can get the knowledge.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it takes a fair chunk of understanding in terms of, being aware of what your sovereignty is exactly, in terms of common law, how to approach living one's life so that if you do get on with your life in a peaceful way, which, doesn't cause, injury or loss to or harm to people and property around you, then it becomes more of I guess a philosophical or ethical way of life, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we all raised our morality to a higher morality, knowing that we've been indoctrinated from birth to lower our morality and logic and reason, even. Like, look at the Brzezinski quote. Soon people will not be able to think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot what they've seen on the nightly news. So all of this stuff has come into reality. So if people realize that, they'll start to turn off the TV, get rid of the Kardashians, and get onto something a bit more powerful. If we do this, we'll have a better community straight away, and government will disappear.
Well,
it'll disappear because there's no need for government.
In terms of that sort of logical and analytical thinking that does empower people. I mean, your brain is a muscle, so the more you utilize those elements, the easier it is to do that. I guess that's why professional performers rehearse. If people are going into court, they're probably advised to role play if they're acting as a litigant in person.
Yeah, I mean, even lawyers have a practice because they have to practice.
Yeah, the worrying thing for people who may not be feeling well is that doctors also have a practice. There's medical practice. But I guess with some things, as I'm aware of with the law, that there's no way that one person can know it all.
No.
And in that way, I guess that's why it's a practice, because you're forever learning. And with that type of you mentioned the Socratic method earlier, or the Socratic way of thinking in terms of utilizing questions and then forming conclusions from the questions that you're asking independently. how do you find that sort of contrast? I mean, you mentioned your education when you first came on the show. You know, how does that method of thinking contrast with the education you received, and you know how people are educated in New Zealand today?
Yeah. Well, obviously the first thing to look at in the school system would be, does the school or class or teacher, does he or she allow you to question? And theoretically, just as a human thing, they probably would. You know, I would ask questions at school, probably nothing like I'd ask today. But it's a very interesting little question there, because when I left school, so when you're basically, just cut that off. Basically, in school, you don't have the knowledge to ask the right questions. You're just a child, you know, and same with your parents. So it depends on what education you do after school. And so later after school, I did a lot of courses in business and all that kind of thing, marketing and all that. And when I'd go to these courses, same with hypnosis, when I go to these courses, I'll go and study it profusely. I'll just be right into it. And I'll come up with questions of integration of what I've already learned. And I ask them questions that baffle them, eh? They're really good teaching. And you go, hey, but what about this? Isn't this what happens in reality? And they go, well, yeah, you know. So you do get a lot of cognitive dissonance when you ask these questions in school. So there's definitely boxes in our commercial systems. Yes, there's big boxes there.
I guess, you know, in terms of some people who, you know, if you're a doctor, I guess you'd study, you know, whatever element it is that you're working on with your patients, and you'd put a certain amount of effort into that. When you're saying as you have, when you you know, have omni-intelligence, where you're looking at many different fields and you're able to cross-reference them, which is something that a lot of people who, you know, are working hard, who are focusing on their career or doing their job as best they can, like you hope most brain surgeons are. You know, it's do you find that gives you a much different perspective than you would do if you sort of specialized in accountancy your whole life?
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky to have good teachers that I found through life, on the internet too, that naturally gave me a bigger perspective in certain areas to look at. But also because I was young getting into occult stuff, when you get into the occult, you usually end up looking at a worldly perspective. Like if you look at the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas and the ancient writings of really interesting stuff. You know, Deepak Chopra, I got into him quite young. He's a very interesting guy to listen to. You know, very intellectual, but very spiritual too. I also got into meditation a lot when I was quite young. Big story behind that, why I did it. And to me, this type of meditation is really just clearing your mind. And even though that sounds quite just easygoing, it isn't. It isn't easygoing at all.
Well, you know, because that's often what people say about yoga. That's often what people say about martial arts. That's often what people say about ballet dancing. But through each of those disciplines, you're putting your mind and your body in a focus, even if that focus is to have a clear mind. As you mentioned, sort of Bruce Lee earlier. And I think that, you know, meditation, whether it's done through martial arts, whether it's done through Tai Chi, yoga, or through mindfulness, I guess.
Well, this particular one I'm talking about is a bit different. And a lot of people, it's hard to know when you've done it. You know, well, it isn't when you do it, but it's hard to know until you've done it. What it is you could say it's based on TM. It's just transcending the mind, transcendental meditation. And so what it is I actually had to get a book out on death before I did it. That's how freaky it is, because how many people actually shut the mind off completely for 20 minutes? A whole 20 minutes. Don't think anything. It's bloody hard to do.
Yes.
But when you figure out and get a few books on it and learn, you can, within 3 weeks I was doing it. We're getting a few books on it. But I had to look at books on death because I thought, what if I die? You're relying on this mind, and you've got things with audio, you've got feelings, you've got visions, you've got all these things going on in the mind all the time.
And that little question going, what if I die? What if I die?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But when you do it, it's incredible. If you can do it.
One thing that both you guys were mentioning were very physical activities as far as opening up the third eye and like meditation is kind of concerned. But do you think that creativity, just pure creativity, the desire to tell stories and the desire to make music and create art, it seems a lot of today's media and culture is designed to let the establishment serve up the entertainment, the art, the culture. Yeah, do you think it's being suppressed in any way? Just the basic urge to be creative.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it goes back to just thinking for yourself. Individuality, creativity, imagination. Definitely imagination. And that we're getting into hypnosis here. People are more susceptible to be hypnotized with a better imagination. And a lot of people have imagination, but if you have a good imagination, and quite a strong one, you'll be very hypnotizable. So that's interesting. So most people will have a good imagination because a lot of people are hypnotizable. So, yeah, the TV, well, again, because they're not thinking, they'll watch TV. They're being downloaded. They're like I said, the critical mind goes off. They're not really thinking. They're just being downloaded then. They also mimic. When you study the think tanks or Tavistock Institute, some of us have heard of that, Bertrand Russell, Huxley, go and check out the Huxley brothers. They're absolutely pivotal on our world today. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World Revisited, very important books because they're really in it's the system we live in the West today. Is really part Huxleyan, So they went into all this stuff too of how this TV thing works, how to get people to love their servitude, they called it. So serving you'll never get out of it.
I was going to say, in terms of that, imagination faculty and how that can, I guess, function as the antithesis to television when you turn off the TV. And as you mentioned, it's been a decade or more since you've habitually watched television.
Oh, absolutely. So I can't even listen to the radio. I turn that off too.
Well, in some ways, when when you turn off the television for a length of time, and then you come across a television, it can often seem very much like a caricature of what you remember it as,
yes.
and seem even more ridiculous, which is quite an interesting sort of perspective.
Yeah. Exactly. This is very important. In fact, before we did last week when I was going to come on, I posted a quote from George Orwell, on the Facebook, and that quote was, and it's very important. He said, "They cannot rebel until they are conscious, and they cannot become conscious until they have rebelled." Right, so this is what the system we live in. It's a dialectical double bind, and among other things, Delphite technique. You heard of that? So what he's saying is this, and this is how I view it: to really wake up. And anyone can do this, but you have to do it this way. It's not going to happen. To really wake up, it's like the old hermit. They call it they go into a hermitage or a Hermes and thinking and thought and all of this stuff fits together. You have to alienate yourself for a while. All shamans have said this. You alienate yourself. You disconnect completely from the system, all of it. This is why meditation can even come into it, because that helps you to focus and to get away from the system. Once you do that, you can look at it as an outsider. Now you're rebelling.
Yeah, I guess in some ways it's like to understand your flexibility in I guess in moving your limbs. You can tense up your muscles and you can relax your muscles, and then you can know what level of tension is running through your muscle. So I guess in terms of turning on the TV and turning off the TV, or in terms of that sort of the meditative space to understand. It's interesting as people grow up and as they leave school, they often don't have time to think about what it is that they'd like to do with their life.
Yeah, that's yeah. How many people today, you ask, what do you want to do with your life? They go, I don't know. Do you like your job? No.
I mean, to a degree, I agree with everything you say, but I also, I'm a big fan of, certain, I don't watch TV per se. I'm not hooked up at all. I just watch, box sets online and such. And there's shows like The Wire and things even as corny as Game of Thrones. There is kind of big stories being told. There is decent like Mr. Robot, for example. There's some interesting stuff out there. I think it's just watching things with a discerning eye.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Good point. Really good point, because that should be addressed. I remember Jack Smith, one of the commercial law teachers I had, he used to do breakdown of movies. And I love movies. I think I don't sit all day watching movies, but if something looks quite interesting and stands out to me, so not TV programs. TV programs, in my opinion, just my opinion, but they're worse than movies. I think the real occult, enlightening things are in Hollywood movies. Jack Smith put them Hollywood as the watchman on the wall. Going back and through history, you'd have watchmen on the wall. They're like a scout. They'd sit on the castle wall and they'd make sure that everything's going okay and they're not going to be invaded. They'll send a scout out. So Hollywood is really sitting in the middle. It's giving you symbolic stories, symbols, and ideas that tell you the truth. So it's almost like the lie has become the truth's become the lie. It's like you'll get more truth in the fiction than you will in the real world. You go in the real world, you've got these crazy uniforms and corporations and doublespeak and people that think they're in charge of you. And then you look at the media and you're getting a balance. You're getting the good and the bad. And you'll find Hollywood movies, they sometimes do it backwards, where the bad guy is telling you the truth and the good guy is telling you a lie.
Being a big movie buff, would you agree that, I was going to ask you, a little bit earlier, going back to some of the other things we were talking about a film called Altered States by Ken Russell that came out in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want to, really dwell upon that film by itself, but would you kind of agree that, there was a different spirit behind cinema in the 60s and 70s that has been totally lost, and you're not getting sort of like this really incredible creative drive that's producing guys like Scorsese and William Friedkin, etc., etc. Do you think that Hollywood has become like this just regurgitation factory of just the same old idea? And don't you think that kind of plays into that whole idea of keeping money within the same circles? Because you think of copyright law, those same stories are being owned by the same people, and there's just no new money coming into it.
Well, I think that because Hollywood is owned by a lot of these big boys and bankers and institutions, they will be degrading the people too. Like, there's a lot of crap out there too. There's a lot of crap out there. like I said, I'd only look at movies that really stand out at me. They're not going to be B-grade movies, and they're not going to be like Independence Day, the sequel or whatever I think came out. I didn't watch that. That's just bullshit. It had a bad write-up, and what's it going to tell me?
And I don't think it's even got Bruce Willis in it, who, I mean, I think they blow a lot of stuff up, but it's CGI blowing up. Which, if you like that sort of thing, which I do occasionally, I may do. But in terms of that discerning eye, I think that's again another interesting thing about being able to step in and step out, is because when that happens, the discerning eye then comes in with exactly what I'd like to watch, how many adverts are in that I'd like to sit through, and in terms of like I said, not getting up and just wanting to turn it off.
Well, an example of the discerning eye is kind of like, think about Independence Day. The absolute ridiculous nature of that film was that it came out over here in the UK on the day of the Brexit vote. So, talk about, subliminal programming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What
do you guys think about Brexit? What do you guys think about that? I mean, I don't see it being going to change anything yet. I haven't seen any evidence where it's going to really.
I mean, in terms, it's I mean, as you're talking about commerce and offshore bankers, at the moment the offshore bankers are cashing up with that over here. So we have a pound which is losing, a stock market which is going to record highs, all at the same time. And it's the fiat currency offshore predators who are cashing in on that kind of speculation at the moment. From the media point of view, there's an awful lot of divisiveness combined with sort of angry Facebook algorithms. So you're getting a lot of people being labelled with slogans, as you said, which is causing the sort of divisiveness where if people are on one side or the other, people are saying, I'd rather, you weren't my friend, or rather I didn't catch you. And, that kind of divisiveness is something that seems to be provoked over here in lieu of conversation, in terms of generating that reactionary gut instinct.
A lot of
the red and the blue again.
Yeah, and there's a lot of inherent, classism and intellectual snobbery involved in it, where people are just being branded racist and branded, essentially it's the middle class versus the commoner almost.
And the way in which, as Jimmy said, it's not just racism which is being used, but that the intellectual divisiveness. There was a letter presented from the educational establishments of Great Britain, signed by principals and vice principals of every university, saying that we should remain in Europe, and not to remain in Europe would be a travesty. What the letter didn't point out was every single one of those people, or the people who were in that post at the time of the Gulf War, were in favour of going to kill many hundreds of thousands of people in search of non-existent weapons of mass destruction. So, how those, as you were saying earlier about non-governmental organisations, governmental quangos and establishments being used as social leverage. And one thing that we've had over here recently is child abuse inquiries. And I think we had a Judge Noel Goddard from New Zealand. I mean, New Zealand also has some inquiries going on at the moment, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I just dragged it up before. Well, I knew you'd bring it up. Here we have an article, Abuse Inquiry. New Zealand judge gets $156,000 payoff to go away. And it's in the news. It's a thing. They openly tell us now what they're doing. and
Yeah.
nobody really cares.
And the surprising thing is that nobody actually, she hasn't spoken to any parliamentary committee. The committee that she was supposed to be speaking in front of, the Home Office Select Committee, the following week after she penned her letter, the chair of that Home Office Select Committee, a member of Parliament by the name of Keith Vaz, was plastered over the front pages of the tabloid press, being caught, I think, arranging to snort drugs and get up to some sexual shenanigans with some Romanian people.
But don't you reckon, like, the really crappy thing about the whole deal is that, like, with the child abuse scandal, like, be it in New Zealand or, like, over here, you'd think that the outrage over that would be enough to spark whatever was going to happen. It just seems to me, like, absolutely, it's a shame in what, we would hope is an ethical and, sensible society, that that sort of thing would be more of an outrage, and like, say, not being able to afford a bigger house. I just think it's kind of one of those things that what was the reaction been like in New Zealand
to what? Just corruption.
Well, I don't know. Did the child abuse scandals over there, open up to the public a side of the establishment that was less than savoury?
I think it did. I think that a lot of people, put it this way, there's so much corruption now. It's like a new normal, and so the child abuse inquiries, people just, a lot that already know a lot of this stuff, they just go, yep, not surprising. Ones that don't know about it might be a bit shocked, going, oh my God, it's terrible, and oh, I think we've been had. And this is just, I talk to people all over the place. I'm in business, so I talk to people all over the place, and I don't mind bringing the cat out of the bag now and again. I'll test people to see what they know. We'll get talking about something, and I'll test them and see, what do you know? And did you know this? I'll try and even give them a bit of a seed, try and give them a bit more info. But really, where's the complaints department? I mean, when we got into the spraying, the chemtrails, which we get just about every day, they're a lot more discreet in New Zealand with the spraying. This is another topic. Now, I've talked to people about that, and they say, well, why don't we just ring the army, or why don't we send notice to the Air Force, or the whatever governing administrative thing for the Air Force? And they don't know, and they're not gonna tell us anything, or they don't know. They literally don't know, or they know and they're not going to tell you because it's a matter of national security. They put it
sometimes it's as we've spoken about before on the Bunker Show. I mean, we haven't gone into fully on weather manipulation and geoengineering, but there are commercial enterprises out there who will cloud seed and who will affect the weather, as we know with the Chinese in the Olympic Games in 2008, that they stated that they engaged in weather modification to ensure the event went as well as they could. But in terms of that sort of complaints department, do you have a similar system in terms of members of parliament, the regional administration, and local administration?
There's no complaints department. This is what people realise. If the ones that have enough, the ones that literally throw down the gauntlet and say, I've had enough of this, I'm going to do something about it. I was like that one day. I've had enough. You'll realise quickly there's no complaints department.
So in terms of the voting system in New Zealand, do you have a mandatory system like they have in Australia where you have to vote and you have a choice of none of the above candidates, or is it a voluntary system? And what sort of voter turnout do you get if it's a voluntary system?
It's voluntary here. There's no statutory law that says you have to vote like Australia.
Oh, you guys are just far more progressive than us Aussies, mate.
Yeah, of course, everything's a double-edged sword, so anything can be used for the agenda. That's another thing that is interesting, is that the bankers being like a judge, they sit between the debtor and the creditor. They're the weight between the red and the blue. They play all sides. We've heard that before. They play all sides. So
in terms of,
they don't care. They
I was
don't
going to
care.
say, in terms of that distraction game, how many people have had enough? How many people, in terms of percentage, decide not to vote in elections in New Zealand?
Well, I'd say every year at least 10% more don't vote. So it's getting worse. Less people are voting.
So less people are choosing to engage that way, or have faith that's a functional use of their time.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I don't know all the reasons, of course, but I would assume from people I've heard from, they are either disillusioned with the system and they don't vote, or they think they know enough to know that voting won't work. Myself, I don't vote, and that's because I don't want any jurisdiction at all.
Yes, I mean, I've heard that being used by the magistrates in court, that if you sign voter registration, then you're consenting to their jurisdiction. But I guess in terms of that particular theatre, do you have a proportionally representative system and parties in coalition, or do you have a red party and a blue party that seem to bounce government backward and forward?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we have the Labour Party, the National Party, the red and the blue. We've got the green. All of these colours are Freemasonic setups as well, too. By the way,
I was just wondering, does the Maori population have any kind of, tribal jurisdiction that they're fought for or use at all?
Yeah, totally. There's Maori sovereign land. There's a lot of Maori people that have knowledge of jurisdiction. It's even been on the, how they have the traffic shows, the Police 10-7 or whatever, and they film live TV of cops pulling over poor people and giving them shit. Well, there's been times where there's the odd guy and he's in his car and he's a Maori, and he says a few words about jurisdiction and the cop goes away.
That's really interesting. Does New Zealand have its own constitution?
Well, constitution's a whole nother topic to talk about. New Zealand is meant to have a constitution based on the Bill of Rights, the Treaty of Waitangi that would cater for the Maori culture, and also it has a thing called letters patent, which really means it's very convoluted, it's very vague. The Bill of Rights are probably the best thing that people could understand that come close to a constitution, and that's based on the American We the People without the Second Amendment, because we can't open carry in New Zealand. We have to license our guns. So, in a way, that's not all a bad thing. I think that, again, the whole systems of government, a lot of people jump into, and the occult and the Freemasons, people jump into the good or bad thing, or they're good, or they're meant to be good, or they're bad. No. They understand the law, and the law is cosmic almost. It's a natural law of cosmic laws. So they know all this shit. And like I said, the media and the corporations are selling the crap to the people through this Marxist doctrine voluntarily. So we have to go along with it voluntarily. And they're playing, like Satan is offering the people a contract, they're playing on the weaknesses of the people. They're giving you all the hyper sex. They're giving you the hyper sugar. They're giving you the violence and shit to give you an outlet, So they're giving it all to us, and we accept it because we think, oh yeah, that's all right, that's harmless, and so it's really a thing where the people, through ignorance.
It's a total world of extremes, isn't it? Because on one hand, like you're saying, we're being constantly served up this kind of horrible sin and vice scenario on in the media, but at the same time, through this burgeoning PC culture, people are being afraid of saying the wrong thing or having the wrong opinion. So it seems to be working on both ends of the both extremes.
Yeah, it is. So, by realizing that we do consent to all this stuff in every way, and in subtle ways, there's hope. There's hope there, because if people can wake up to the techniques of the plot to bring us into this collective cult, global cult, then we can at least voluntarily, even with our thinking, start to build a better life for others and ourselves. Like by even learning the principles of, say, law, and NLP and the things I just mentioned, you have a better community, a stronger community, that's more honest too. You don't need to be so protective of your privacy only to the point of what's rational or logical. Like, you know what I'm saying? The privacy is absolutely essential, but there's times when you can't be private and you shouldn't be private, i.e. open carry. I mean, in the US, they'll carry a gun on their hip still in a lot of states. So that's being honest. That's why they can do it. So if they don't carry the gun on the hip, the cop can say, hey, you got a concealed weapon. Why have you got a concealed weapon? He wants to know the mens rea. Why? What are you thinking? Why do you have to hide that weapon? So if you open carry, and this is how it works in all the commercial law. Like a friend of mine, he's quite well off. He's a businessman. He talked to me about a thing called a look-through trust. A look-through trust, which kind of sums up what it is. Instead of having a foreign bank account where it's kind of hidden, like a hidden weapon, the government come and if it can find it and bust it, your intention, your mens rea, is to hide the booty. See, so a look-through trust says, hey, here you go. Yeah, I've got property here. What are you going to do about it? So you're putting your balls on the line to say, what are you going to do about it? Here it is, like a gun. So by doing that, and I use this technique, it's part of law, is when you put yourself on the line of what's necessary publicly, you're fine. You're fine. They'll leave you alone. But if you start to conceal everything overly done, then you're going to be hassled for conspiracy, etc. So, and that also goes into, if you understand all this, you start to think, I don't care if the government comes on my Facebook. I don't care if it starts to come in and drag me to court, because we're trying to get to truth here. Let's bring it to court. Let's get some evidence.
Cliff, you mentioned property earlier. I mean, in New Zealand, it's quite a comparable, I guess, in size to the United Kingdom. But you have a lot less people living there. So, what are the property prices like? And do people rent property? Is it cheap to get a roof over your head? Comparatively, or is there a widening gap between people who own property in considerable amount and the people who don't?
Well, it's seems to be very mirrored in that sense to the rest of the Western world. When we had a housing crisis, we've had a housing crisis in the main cities of New Zealand for quite a while. And there's a housing crisis because the eco movement, through the United Nations, which is tied up into the global communist movement too, by the way. Another topic.
2020, I presume. Yeah.
Yeah, Agenda 21. Yeah. So they're pushing that here because we're in with Britain big time, and Britain is the foundation of this global plot. So that is limiting the flow of resources. It's put the price up on resources. They don't tell us this in New Zealand. They don't need to say it's carbon tax or whatever. They just vaguely say things and then do it. And then people go, why did my meat go up 3 times? Because the United Nations said that the fart tax, the carbon coming out of its ass, is polluting the atmosphere, which is a load of rubbish, of course. People need to look into that. So anyway, so all of that stuff. So you've got the clamp down on resources on one end, which drives the prices up. You've got massive immigration coming in, which means we need more houses to house them. And so all of this equates to massive price increases. So properties in the last 10 years in Auckland have gone up at least threefold. 300%. So it's incredible. So there's a lot more homeless here than ever.
Are you guys aware of the story that's going around? Like it's a pretty big story in the alternative media at the moment that very rich people and like quite famous corporate bodies buying up chunks of land and moving out of their out of their own homes and into the safety zone of New Zealand. Have you heard anything about that? In preparation for Putin's big next move.
Putin's big next move. I think a lot of people are coming here to get away from the chaos, because there's obviously more chaos in the bigger continents. So, New Zealand is nothing like that. We're not getting flooded with immigrants in the way that Europe is. We're not close to Russia. We're not part of all that. So we've always been quite isolated here. Even in World War II, we didn't really get touched. We were quite.
And so I guess that it's manufactured scarcity. I mean, absolutely. Is there much of a reason, or is it because that it's hard to find employment, why people don't move out of the cities into more rural parts of New Zealand?
Because the immigration, they come over and they will work on the farms cheap. They're used to earning way less, so they come over and work for fuck all. And then you've also got the highly technicized society. New Zealand is right up there with the technology. So when you couple those two factors, you get a limitation of work. Plus, with this Agenda 21, they're closing down all the old industrial factories. They're sending them to China. That'll happen in New Zealand. I grew up when that happened, so that had a big effect. We have a thing called the warehouse, and it's red, funnily enough, and it comes from China. It's red, and and it imports, and we've got all these import junk from China coming in, and it is junk. There's so much junk coming in. So we're getting the same as all the other Western countries, basically. We really are. It's the same everywhere. It's a standard system.
And it's interesting to see in countries with different geographics, different amounts of resources compared to population, that it's the same process which is being played out on a global agenda. And the City of London, the Crown institutions obviously play a major part, as you mentioned, the Institute of International Affairs, the Commission on Foreign Relations. We've mentioned a number of other of those influential above government organisations that seem to function out of the Queen's offshore banking.
See, people need to know. People need to know the government. The government is the people, and the government, being the people, are the individuals. They cannot be a collective. There's the other little con that is well versed with a lot of researchers these days. Check out Edward Griffin. Check out his work; is brilliant on the collective techniques being used. So that's the true government.
We're getting close to the end of the show now, and thanks to the Dark City guys for letting us extend it for a little while. I wondered if you've got anything you'd like to say to the guys upstairs here at Westminster in Parliament, who, if there's anything that you'd like to say to them. And also point us in the direction of your YouTube channel and your Facebook group as well.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, I'll make that quick. Okay, well, to the elite, to the establishment, whatever, there are people out there, including myself, that know what's going on. All I can say is that the lower rungs of the establishment are being used. I don't think that'll change anything, but they're being used and they're expendable. They probably know they're expendable, so it doesn't really matter. I don't think that's going to change. I just hope people catch on to the right knowledge. There's so much rubbish out there. I really hope people do. So if you go to, I've got a YouTube channel called just CliffRockafella. It's easy to remember. The reason why I came up with that name, people go, "Oh my God, what a name!" I'm a musician, man. And I thought, well, where's a good place for the Rockefellers? Well, you chuck them off a cliff, don't you? And my name is Cliff, so yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, Cliff, and thanks for that that message. And the Facebook group is
Awake New Zealand Global Elite Discussion. And what we do is we talk about the system, the global system. We also look at remedies, like I've gone over, with a good amount of detail. We'll be getting into it. We get guests on from all over the world, and it's going to be a good time. So
and
feel free to join up.
Yeah, there's lots of great information about what's going on internationally from a global perspective, and it's well worth checking out how that develops. We're back next week in the bunker. Thanks for the Dark City guys for sorting out everything that they need to make this happen week in, week out.
Yeah.
We've got Neil Sanders coming in a couple of weeks, and we're looking forward to that. And
yeah, man, it's been awesome talking to you, Cliff, and we hope to get you back sometime. And here's a parting one for you. You know, like no matter what you think about the occult yourself, whatever your religious beliefs, just understand that other people believe in it out there, and they're in the elite.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
all the best, and we'll see you next week for more live radio, uncensored, coming to you live and kicking on Dark City Radio. Thank you, and good night.
Good night.